As Umidike settled into a sense of normalcy after the recent disturbances, the village's newfound peace was accompanied by a subtle tension. The whispers in the wind had subsided, but the villagers remained wary, their senses attuned to any signs of impending trouble. CHIDIMMA, ever vigilant, continued her duties with renewed focus. She knew that the village's progress had attracted attention, both positive and negative. The recent encounters had shown her that not everyone welcomed Umidike's success, and she was determined to protect what they had built. One morning, as CHIDIMMA made her way to the central square, she noticed a group of strangers entering the village. They were dressed in fine robes, their demeanor exuding authority and power. The villagers watched them with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. At the head of the group was a tall man with sharp features and piercing eyes. He carried himself with the air of someone used to commanding respect, and the way the others deferred to him made it clear that he was the leader. CHIDIMMA approached the group, her curiosity piqued. "Welcome to Umidike," she said, her voice calm and composed. "I am CHIDIMMA. How can we assist you?" The leader of the group inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her. "I am Obina, an emissary of the king from the neighboring kingdom of Amegbo. We have heard much about the progress your village has made and the challenges you have overcome. I have been sent to discuss matters of mutual interest." CHIDIMMA's eyes narrowed slightly. While his words were polite, there was an underlying tone that made her uneasy. "We are honored by your visit, Obina. What matters would you like to discuss?" Obina smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Your village has become a beacon of prosperity in the region. The king is keen to establish an alliance with Umidike, one that will be mutually beneficial." CHIDIMMA felt a prickle of unease. Alliances were not uncommon, but they often came with strings attached. She decided to tread carefully. "We appreciate the offer of alliance, but such decisions are not made lightly. We must consider what is best for our people." Obina's smile widened, though there was a hint of steel in his gaze. "Of course, we understand. The king values your independence and would not seek to infringe upon it. However, it would be wise to consider the advantages of aligning with a kingdom as powerful as Amegbo." CHIDIMMA nodded, her mind racing. There was something about Obina that didn't sit right with her. She decided to buy some time. "We will discuss your proposal with our leaders and elders. In the meantime, you are welcome to stay as our guest." Obina's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he nodded. "Very well. We will await your decision." As Obina and his entourage were shown to their accommodations, CHIDIMMA quickly sought out his Udo and the other village leaders. She explained the situation, her concerns evident in her voice. "There's something about this that doesn't feel right," she said. Obina's words were polite, but there was an underlying tension. "We need to be cautious." Udo frowned, his expression thoughtful. An alliance with Amegbo could bring both benefits and risks. "We must be careful not to compromise our village's autonomy." The elders agreed, and it was decided that they would take their time to consider the proposal. They would gather more information about Amegbo and its king before making any decisions. As the days passed, CHIDIMMA kept a close eye on Obina and his group. They seemed polite and respectful, but CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. She noticed that they often spoke in hushed tones and that Obina seemed particularly interested in the village's resources and defenses. One evening, as CHIDIMMA walked through the village, she overheard a conversation between two of Obina's men. They were speaking in low voices, unaware of her presence. "Obina is growing impatient," one of them said. "The king expects results. We can't leave without securing the alliance." "The village leaders are cautious," the other replied. "They won't agree easily. We may need to apply more pressure." CHIDIMMA's heart raced as she realized the implications of their words. Obina's visit was not just a diplomatic mission, it was an attempt to coerce Umidike into an alliance that might not be in their best interest. Determined to uncover the truth, CHIDIMMA decided to confront Obinna directly. The next morning, she requested a private meeting with him. Obinna greeted her with a smile, but CHIDIMMA could see the calculating look in his eyes. "What can I do for you, CHIDIMMA?" "I overheard a conversation between your men," CHIDIMMA said, her voice steady. "It seems that your king is expecting results, and you are under pressure to secure an alliance. I'd like to know what that means for Umidike." Obinna's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "The king is eager to form a partnership with your village. He believes it will be beneficial for both parties. However, I understand your concerns. We have no intention of forcing your hand." CHIDIMMA held his gaze, her expression unyielding. "I appreciate your candor, but I must be honest as well. Umidike values its independence and the well-being of its people above all else. We will not be pressured into an alliance that does not serve our best interest." Obinna's eyes hardened, and for a moment, CHIDIMMA saw a flash of anger. But then he smiled again, though it lacked warmth. "Of course. I respect your resolve, CHIDIMMA. I only hope that you will consider the benefits of what we offer." CHIDIMMA nodded, but the conversation had confirmed her suspicions. She knew now that Obinna's visit was not as friendly as it seemed, and that the village would need to be on guard. As Obinna and his men continued their stay in Umidike, CHIDIMMA and the village leaders began to prepare for the possibility of conflict. They strengthened their defenses and quietly rallied the villagers, ensuring that they were ready for whatever might come. The storm was gathering, and CHIDIMMA knew that the days ahead would be challenging. But she was determined to protect her home and her people, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in Umidike grew increasingly tense. The villagers could sense the unease, though they weren't fully aware of the looming threat. CHIDIMMA, Udo, and the elders worked tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while preparing for potential conflict. Obinna and his men, still residing in the village, became a source of growing concern. Though they continued to present themselves as polite and respectful guests, CHIDIMMA could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on Umidike. One evening, as CHIDIMMA was meeting with Nkem to discuss their next steps, they were interrupted by one of the village scouts. The young man was breathless, his eyes wide with fear. "CHIDIMMA, Nkem," he gasped. "I've just returned from patrolling the outskirts of the village. There's a large group of armed men camped at the border, just out of sight. They are not from any of the neighboring villages, they are from Igbo." Nkem's expression darkened. "This is more serious than we thought. Obinna's men are likely reinforcements, sent to ensure that we agree to their terms." CHIDIMMA's heart pounded as she considered the implications. "We need to inform Udo and the elders immediately. If Obinna intends to use force, we must be ready to defend ourselves." They hurried to Udo's compound, where the elder was deep in thought, considering the latest developments. When CHIDIMMA and Nkem relayed the scouts' report, Udo's expression grew grave. "This confirms our fears," Udo said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Igbo is determined to bring us under their control. We must prepare for the worst." The village leaders quickly convened a council meeting, where they discussed their options. It was clear that Obinna's proposal was not a genuine offer of alliance, but rather a thinly veiled ultimatum. Umidike had no choice but to resist. "We need to strengthen our defenses and ensure that the villagers are ready," CHIDIMMA said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "But we must also consider our options for diplomacy. If there's a way to avoid bloodshed, we should pursue it." Udo nodded in agreement. "We will send a message to Obinna, requesting a meeting to discuss our concerns. We must make it clear that we will not be intimidated, but we are willing to negotiate peacefully." As preparations were made, Chidimma couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The village's defenses were strong, but they were no match for a full-scale invasion. She knew that if it came to battle, many lives would be lost. The following day, Chidimma and Nkem, along with a few trusted elders, approached Obina's camp. They had sent a message ahead, requesting the meeting, and Obina had agreed. When they arrived, they were greeted by Obina, who stood at the entrance to the camp with his men flanking him. His smile was polite, but there was an air of smugness about him that made Chidimma uneasy. "Chidimma, is Udo, I'm glad you agreed to meet," Obina said, his tone deceptively friendly. "I hope we can come to an understanding that benefits both our peoples." Chidimma stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Obina's. "We are here to ensure the safety and independence of Umidike. We've seen your men camped at our border, and we know you've brought more soldiers. This doesn't feel like a peaceful offer of alliance." Obina's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "The soldiers are merely a precaution. The king wishes to protect his interest, and we hope that you will see reason and accept our terms. We offer protection, resources, and trade opportunities. But if you refuse, we cannot guarantee your safety." Nkem clenched his fist, his anger barely contained. "So that's the truth of it, then? You're here to conquer us, not to form an alliance." Obina shrugged, his smile turning cold. "Call it what you will. The king's offer is generous, but his patience is limited. If you do not agree to our terms, the consequences will be severe." Chidimma felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We will not be coerced into submission, Obina. We value our freedom and our people above all else. If you choose to make enemies of us, we will fight to protect what is ours." Obina's expression darkened. "So be it. You've made your choice. But remember this, the king does not tolerate defiance. When the time comes, you will regret your decision." With that, Obina turned and walked back into his camp, leaving Chidimma and her companions standing at the edge of a brewing storm. As they returned to the village, Chidimma's mind raced with thoughts of the coming conflict. She knew that they had made the right decision, but the weight of what lay ahead was heavy on her heart. Umidike was on the brink of war, and the days of peace were rapidly slipping away. That night, as the village prepared for what seemed inevitable, Chidimma stood alone at the edge of the forest, looking out into the darkness. The stars above flickered faintly, as if dimmed by the gathering clouds of war. But deep within her, a fire burned bright. She would fight for her home, her people, and the future they had worked so hard to build. No matter the cost, she would not let Umidike fall into the hands of those who sought to destroy their way of life. The storm was coming, and Chidimma was ready. The next morning, Umidike awoke to a tense stillness. The villagers moved about with purpose, their faces set with determination as they prepared for what was to come. The children, usually full of laughter, were kept close to their homes, their parents' anxiety weighing heavily on them. Chidimma walked through the village, offering words of encouragement and support. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she also saw strength. The people of Umidike were resilient, and they had faced many challenges before. This would be no different, she told herself, even though the threat now loomed larger than ever. Udo had called a meeting of the village leaders to finalize their strategy. They had already fortified the village's defenses, but they needed to decide how to respond if Obina's men made the first move. As Chidimma entered the meeting hall, she was greeted by the somber faces of the elders. Nkem was there as well, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a stern resolve. "We must be prepared for anything," Udo began, his voice grave. "Obina made it clear that he will not accept our refusal lightly. We must assume that he will attack soon." Nkem nodded. "We should set up a rotation of scouts to monitor the border. If they make any sudden movements, we need to know immediately." One of the elders, a wise woman named Adana, spoke up. We must also consider our options for retreat. If the battle turns against us, we need to ensure that our women, children, and elders are safe. CHIDIMMA agreed. We should have a plan in place to evacuate them to the forest. It's dense and difficult to navigate, which will give us an advantage if we need to regroup. The village leaders discussed the details of the plan, making sure that every contingency was covered. As they spoke, CHIDIMMA felt a growing sense of urgency. She knew that time was running out. Just as the meeting was drawing to a close, a scout burst into the hall, his face pale with fear. "They are coming," he cried. "Obina's men are marching toward the village. They are armed and ready for battle." The room fell silent as the weight of the scout's words sank in. CHIDIMMA felt her heart quicken, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We knew this was coming. We are ready." Udo stood, his voice commanding. "Gather the warriors. Alert the villagers. We will defend our home with everything we have." The elders and leaders quickly dispersed, each taking on their assigned roles. CHIDIMMA and Kem led the charge to rally the village's warriors. The men and women who had trained for this moment gathered their weapons and armor, their faces set with grim determination. CHIDIMMA's heart swelled with pride as she saw the courage in their eyes. These were her people, and they were ready to stand against whatever came their way. The villagers who were not fighting were escorted to the forest, where they would be safe from the battle. CHIDIMMA watched as mothers clutched their children close, their faces lined with worry. She offered them a reassuring smile, hoping to give them strength. As the warriors took their positions, CHIDIMMA and Kem stood at the forefront, ready to lead. The tension in the air was palpable, and the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder with each passing moment. Then, in the distance, they saw them, Obina's men, marching in formation. There were more of them than CHIDIMMA had anticipated, and they were armed to the teeth. At their head was Obina, his face twisted in a sneer of triumph. "People of Umidike." Obina called out, his voice echoing across the field. "You have defied the will of the king, and now you will pay the price. Surrender now, and we may show mercy. Resist, and you will be crushed." CHIDIMMA stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "We will not surrender our freedom. We will fight for our home, our people, and our future. If you choose to attack, know that you will face the full strength of Umidike." Obina's sneer deepened, and he raised his hand, signaling his men to prepare for battle. "So be it," he spat. "Destroy them." With a deafening roar, Obina's men charged forward, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. CHIDIMMA and Kem led the warriors of Umidike into the fray, their hearts pounding with the thrill and terror of battle. The clash was brutal and fierce. The air was filled with the sound of metal clashing against metal, the cries of the wounded, and the shouts of warriors locked in combat. CHIDIMMA fought with everything she had, her movement swift and precise as she parried blows and struck down her enemies. But the battle was not without its cost. Umidike's warriors were brave and skilled, but they were outnumbered. CHIDIMMA could see that the tide was turning against them, and her heart sank as she realized that they might not be able to hold out much longer. In the midst of the chaos, she caught sight of Obina, standing at the edge of the battlefield, watching the carnage with a satisfied smirk. Fury surged through CHIDIMMA, and she knew that she had to take him down if they had any chance of winning. With a fierce determination, she fought her way through the throng of enemies, her eyes locked on Obina. She could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her, but she pushed forward, her resolve unshakable. Finally, she reached him. Obina's eyes widened in surprise as he saw her approaching, but he quickly regained his composure. He drew his sword, ready to face her. "You should have surrendered," Obina sneered. "Now you'll die along with the rest of your pathetic village." CHIDIMMA raised her weapon, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "You underestimate us, Obina. We will never bow to tyrants like you." The two clashed, their swords ringing out as they struck and parried. Obina was skilled, but CHIDIMMA's determination gave her strength. She fought with everything she had, knowing that the fate of her village rested on this moment. Finally, with a swift and powerful strike, CHIDIMMA disarmed Obina, sending his sword flying from his hand. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and fear. CHIDIMMA stood over him, her sword pointed at his chest. "Leave now," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "Tell your king that Umidike will never be his. If you ever return, we will show no mercy." Obina's face twisted with rage and humiliation, but he knew he was defeated. He spat on the ground, his voice seething with hatred. "This isn't over, CHIDIMMA. The king will hear of this, and when he does, you'll all suffer." With that, he turned and fled, his men following him in retreat. The warriors of Umidike watched as they disappeared into the distance, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over them. CHIDIMMA lowered her sword, her body trembling with the adrenaline and fatigue of battle. They had won, but the victory was bittersweet. The cost had been high, and she knew that this was only the beginning. As the villagers began to tend to the wounded and mourn their fallen, CHIDIMMA looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. The storm had passed, but another loomed on the horizon. Umidike had survived the first strike, but the fight was far from over. CHIDIMMA knew that they would have to be stronger, smarter, and more united than ever before if they were to protect their home from the darkness that threatened to consume them. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, Umidike was left in a somber stillness. The village, though standing, bore the scars of the conflict. Homes had been damaged, fields trampled, and the air was heavy with the scent of sweat and blood. The warriors who had fought so bravely now moved with weary steps, their faces etched with the grief of loss and the relief of survival. CHIDIMMA stood in the center of the village, her eyes scanning the scene before her. The sight of the wounded being tended to by the healers, the families mourning their fallen loved ones, and the elders consoling those who had lost everything weighed heavily on her heart. She knew that this battle, though won, had come at a great cost. Nkem approached her, his face grim but his eyes filled with respect. "You fought with the strength of 10 warriors, CHIDIMMA. We owe this victory to your courage." CHIDIMMA shook her head, her voice tinged with sadness. "This victory is ours, Nkem, but it came at a high price. Too many lives were lost today." And Obina's words. "He won't stop. The king won't stop." Nkem placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We knew the risks, and we were prepared to face them. But you're right, this isn't over. The king will send more men, stronger forces. We must be ready." As they spoke, his Udo approached, his expression weary but resolute. "We've sent scouts to ensure that Obina and his men have truly retreated. We need to take this time to regroup, to mourn our losses, and to prepare for what's to come." CHIDIMMA nodded. "We need to strengthen our defenses, and we need to reach out to our neighboring villages. If the king is determined to conquer Umidike, he won't stop here. We must unite with those who share our desire for freedom." His Udo agreed. "I'll send messengers to the other villages. We'll need their support if we're to stand a chance against the king's army." As the village began the slow process of recovery, CHIDIMMA found herself drawn to the edge of the forest, where the families who had been evacuated were now returning. She watched as they emerged from the trees, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Among them was her mother, Amina, who rushed to CHIDIMMA's side as soon as she saw her. Amina's eyes were filled with tears as she embraced her daughter. "I heard the fighting. I was so afraid." CHIDIMMA held her mother close, drawing strength from her presence. "We are safe for now, Mama. But the battle isn't over. The king will come for us again." Amina pulled back, her expression fierce. "Then we'll fight again. We won't let them take our home." Chidimma nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She had always known that this fight would not be easy, but standing here with her mother, surrounded by the people she loved, she felt a fire burning within her. They would not be defeated. They would not surrender. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Chidimma gathered the villagers together. They formed a circle in the center of the village, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of torches. The air was filled with a solemn quiet, the weight of the day's events hanging over them like a heavy shroud. Udo stepped forward, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. Today, we faced a great challenge, and we have emerged victorious. But this victory has come at a cost. We have lost brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. We must honor their memory by continuing to fight for the freedom they gave their lives to protect. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the villagers. The king of Amegbo will not stop. He will send more men, more soldiers, more threats to our way of life. But we will stand strong. We will not be broken. We will fight for our land, our people, and our future. Chidimma felt the energy of the crowd shift, their sorrow transforming into resolve. She stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. We are Umidike. We are a people of strength, of courage, of unity. We will face whatever comes our way, and we will do it together. The king may try to break us, but he will fail. We will not be conquered. The villagers erupted into a cheer, their voices ringing out into the night. The sound echoed through the trees, a declaration of their determination, their defiance. Chidimma felt a swell of pride as she looked around at the faces of her people. They were ready. They were strong. As the crowd began to disperse, returning to their homes to rest and recover, Chidimma remained standing in the center of the village. Nkem joined her, his eyes reflecting the same determination she felt. "What's our next move?" he asked, his voice low. Chidimma thought for a moment before answering. "We strengthen our defenses, we reach out to our allies, and we prepare for the next attack. But we also need to think beyond just defending ourselves. We need to find a way to end this threat once and for all." Nkem nodded, understanding her unspoken words. "You're right. We need to find the king's weakness, something we can use to turn the tide in our favor." Chidimma's mind raced with possibilities. The king of Amegbo was a powerful man, but no man was invincible. There had to be something they could do, some way to undermine his power, to make him see that Umidike was not a village to be trifled with. As she stood there, the stars twinkling above her like distant beacons of hope, Chidimma knew that the path ahead would be difficult. But she also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and they had the strength of their ancestors guiding them. And with that, she made a silent vow. She would find a way to protect her village, to end the threat of Amegbo once and for all. She would not rest until Umidike was safe, until her people could live in peace once more. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. In the days that followed, Umidike worked tirelessly to rebuild. The villagers mended their homes, tended to their wounded, and honored their dead. Though the physical scars of the battle would take time to heal, the spirit of the village remained unbroken. But even as life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, the threat of the king's retaliation loomed large. Chidimma knew that they couldn't face the next assault alone. They needed allies, villages and communities who were also under the shadow of the king's tyranny. If they could unite the surrounding villages, they might stand a chance against the might of Amegbo. Udo called a meeting of the village leaders to discuss the plan. The meeting hall was filled with the murmur of voices as the elders, warriors, and advisors gathered to hear what their next steps would be. "We cannot afford to wait for the king to strike again," Udo began, his voice steady. "We must be proactive. We must seek out those who share our desire for freedom and who are willing to stand with us." Nkem stepped forward, addressing the group. There are several villages to the north that have long resisted the king's influence. If we can persuade them to join our cause, we could form a powerful alliance. CHIDIMMA nodded in agreement. I propose that we send emissaries to these villages. We must convince them that our fight is their fight too. We need to show them that together, we can stand against the king. The elders discussed the proposal, weighing the risks and benefits. They knew that reaching out to other villages was dangerous. If the king's spies learned of their plans, it could lead to even greater retaliation. But they also knew that without allies, Umidike would be vulnerable. After much deliberation, the decision was made. Udo appointed CHIDIMMA and Kem to lead the delegation. They would travel to the northern villages, speak with their leaders, and try to forge alliances that could turn the tide in their favor. The preparations for the journey began immediately. CHIDIMMA and Kem gathered a small group of trusted warriors to accompany them, and they made sure to pack supplies for the long journey ahead. The villagers offered their blessings and prayers, knowing that this mission could determine the future of their home. Before they departed, CHIDIMMA sought out her mother. Amina was in their home, carefully packing herbs and remedies for the journey. She looked up as CHIDIMMA entered, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. I knew this day would come, Amina said softly. You are destined for great things, my daughter. But a mother's heart still fears for her child. CHIDIMMA embraced her mother, drawing comfort from her warmth. I will be careful, Mama. And I will return. I promise. Amina smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know you will. You are strong, just like your father was. And you have the heart of a warrior. CHIDIMMA felt a surge of determination. She would not let her mother down. She would do whatever it took to protect their village, to secure a future where they could live in peace. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, CHIDIMMA, Nkem, and their small band of warriors set out on their journey. The villagers gathered to see them off, offering words of encouragement and hope. The path to the northern villages was long and treacherous. They traveled through dense forests, across rivers, and over rocky terrain. The journey tested their endurance, but CHIDIMMA and Kem remained focused on their mission. As they traveled, they encountered other travelers, merchants, farmers, and hunters who shared stories of the king's growing influence. It became clear that the shadow of Amegbo extended far beyond their own village. Fear and resentment toward the king simmered in the hearts of many, and CHIDIMMA knew that this could be the key to uniting them. After several days of travel, they reached the first of the northern villages. The village of Onika was larger than Umidike, with strong walls and watchtowers that spoke of its readiness for battle. The people of Onika were known for their skill in crafting weapons and armor, and CHIDIMMA hoped that they would see the value in an alliance. They were met at the village gates by the guards, who eyed them warily. State your business, one of the guards demanded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Nkem stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We are emissaries from the village of Umidike. We seek an audience with your leaders to discuss a matter of great importance. The guards exchanged glances before nodding. Follow us, one of them said, leading the group into the village. CHIDIMMA and Kem were brought before the village council, a group of stern-faced men and women who listened intently as they explained their mission. CHIDIMMA spoke passionately about the need for unity, about the dangers posed by the king of Amegbo, and about the strength that could be found in standing together. The council members listened in silence, their expressions unreadable. When CHIDIMMA finished, there was a long pause before the leader of the council, a tall woman named Neka, spoke. You speak wisely, young one, Neka said, her voice measured. But forming an alliance is not a decision to be taken lightly. We have defended our village against the king's men before, and we will do so again if necessary. What makes you think that your village, so far to the south, can offer us anything that we do not already have? Chidimma met Neka's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Because the king's power is growing. He won't stop at just one village or even a few. He seeks to conquer all the lands he can, to bring every village under his rule. Alone, we may hold out for a time, but together, we can stand as a united front. We can protect our way of life, our freedom. We can ensure that our children will not live in fear of the king's soldiers. Neka regarded her thoughtfully, and for a moment, Chidimma feared that her words had not been enough. But then Neka nodded slowly. You speak the truth. The king's ambition knows no bounds. Perhaps it is time that we consider a different approach. The council members murmured in agreement, and Neka turned to Chidimma and Kem. We will discuss your proposal among ourselves, but I believe that an alliance could be in both of our interests. We will send word to the other northern villages and arrange a meeting. If they agree, we will join you in this fight. Chidimma felt a wave of relief and hope. This was the first step, but it was a crucial one. If they could secure the support of the northern villages, they would have a fighting chance against the king. Nkem smiled at Chidimma as they left the council hall. You did well, Chidimma. We may just have turned the tide in our favor. Chidimma nodded, but she knew that their journey was far from over. There were still more villages to visit, more alliances to forge, and more dangers to face. But for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. They were not alone in this fight. As they continued on their journey, Chidimma thought of her village, of her mother, of the people she had vowed to protect. She would not rest until she had done everything in her power to secure their future. And with each step, she grew more certain that they could win this fight. But the road ahead was long, and the challenges were many. And in the shadows, the king of Amegbo was already making his next move. While Chidimma and Kem journeyed through the northern villages, forging alliances and gathering support, the king of Amegbo was not idle. In his grand palace, surrounded by advisors and spies, the king seethed with anger at the news of his army's defeat in Umidike. Obina's failure had been an embarrassment, a blot on his reign that could not be tolerated. Seated on his throne, the king listened as his advisors reported on the growing resistance. The people of Umidike are rallying other villages to their cause, one advisor said, his voice trembling. They are gaining support, Your Majesty. If they succeed in uniting the northern villages, they could pose a serious threat. The king's eyes narrowed, his mind already formulating a plan. He could not allow this rebellion to grow. If the villages united, they could indeed challenge his power, and that was something he would not permit. But brute force alone would not suffice. He needed a strategy that would crush this uprising before it gained any more momentum. The king turned to his chief advisor, a shrewd man named Eziania, known for his cunning and ruthlessness. What do you suggest, Eziania? How do we put an end to this rebellion once and for all? Eziania bowed deeply before speaking. Your Majesty, the people of Umidike and their allies believe they are fighting for freedom, for their land, for their future. We must show them that their efforts are futile, that resistance will only bring them more suffering. But to do that, we must strike at their heart. We must destroy their spirit. The king listened intently, his interest piqued. Go on. We should spread rumors that Chidimma, the one who leads them, is not who she claims to be. We should plant seeds of doubt among her allies, make them question her loyalty, her origins. If we can turn her own people against her, their unity will crumble. The king nodded slowly, considering the idea. And how do you propose we do that? Eziania's eyes gleamed with malice. We can use her mother's past against her. There are already whispers about her mother's origins, about the possibility that Chidimma herself is not truly of Umidike. If we spread these rumors, if we make her people believe that she is a spy or an outsider sent to deceive them, it will weaken their resolve. They will doubt her, and doubt leads to division. The king smiled coldly. Yes, that could work. But we need more than just rumors. We need proof, something tangible that will make them believe. Find someone who can forge documents, who can create a false history that will cast her in a suspicious light. Isianya bowed again. I will see to it at once, Your Majesty. And when the time is right, we will reveal this information to her allies. We will let them destroy themselves from within. The king leaned back in his throne, satisfied with the plan. Good. And while you're at it, increase the patrols around Umidike. Make sure they know we are watching, that we are ready to strike at any moment. Keep the pressure on them. Isianya nodded and left the throne room to carry out the king's orders. The king of Amegbo watched him go, a cruel smile playing on his lips. This rebellion would not stand. He would crush it, and he would make an example of Umidike to all who dared defy him. Meanwhile, in Umidike, the village was slowly rebuilding, but the atmosphere remained tense. Though they had won the battle, the villagers knew that the war was far from over. Scouts reported seeing increased activity from the king's soldiers in the surrounding areas, and the elders met frequently to discuss their defenses. CHIDIMMA and Nkem continued their mission, traveling from village to village, spreading their message of unity and resistance. They were met with varying degrees of success. Some villages were eager to join the cause, while others were more hesitant, fearing the wrath of the king. As they traveled, CHIDIMMA felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier on her shoulders. The more allies they gained, the more she realized how much was at stake. These people were placing their trust in her, believing in her vision of a united front against the king. She could not afford to fail them. But even as the alliance grew stronger, CHIDIMMA began to sense an undercurrent of unease among the people they met. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was something in the way some of the village leaders looked at her, in the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. It was as if a shadow was creeping into their midst, something that threatened to unravel everything they had worked so hard to build. One evening, as they camped in the forest on their way to another village, Nkem noticed the change in CHIDIMMA's demeanor. They sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames chasing away the chill of the night, but CHIDIMMA's mind was elsewhere. You seem troubled, Nkem said gently. What's on your mind? CHIDIMMA stared into the fire, her brow furrowed. I don't know, Nkem. Something doesn't feel right. I can't shake the feeling that we are being watched, that someone is trying to undermine us. Nkem frowned, considering her words. You may be right. The king is a cunning man. He won't just sit back and let us gather allies without trying to stop us. But whatever he's planning, we'll face it together. We've come too far to turn back now. CHIDIMMA nodded, but the unease in her heart remained. She knew that Nkem was right, they couldn't afford to be deterred by fear or doubt. But as they prepared to continue their journey, she couldn't help but wonder what new challenges awaited them. The road ahead was uncertain, and the shadows were growing longer. CHIDIMMA could only hope that their unity would be strong enough to withstand whatever the king had in store. The journey to the next village, Aruku, took several days. The landscape changed as they traveled, with the dense forest giving way to rolling hills and open plains. The people of Aruku were known for their wisdom and their deep connection to the spiritual world, and CHIDIMMA hoped they would see the value in joining the alliance. As they approached the village, CHIDIMMA felt a strange sense of foreboding. The sky was overcast, and the wind carried a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She glanced at Nkem, who was riding beside her, and saw the same unease reflected in his eyes. When they arrived at the village gates, they were greeted by a group of villagers led by an elder named Obesai. He was a tall, imposing man with a deep voice that resonated with authority. Obesai welcomed them, but there was a wariness in his eyes as he spoke. We have heard of your journey, and of your mission to unite the villages against the king, Obesai said, his tone measured. But before we discuss such matters, We must know more about you, CHIDIMMA of Umidike. There are rumors that have reached us, rumors that cast doubt on your true origins. CHIDIMMA's heart skipped a beat. She had feared that the rumors would spread, but hearing them spoken aloud by Obesai brought a new level of anxiety. She had prepared herself to face the challenges of uniting the villages, but she had not anticipated that her own identity would be questioned so openly. Rumors are often tools used by those who fear the truth, Nkem interjected, his voice firm. CHIDIMMA is the daughter of Umidike, and she has proven her loyalty to her people time and time again. Obesai regarded Nkem with a calm, assessing gaze. Perhaps. But we must be certain before we commit to an alliance that could endanger our village. We have heard that CHIDIMMA's mother is not of Umidike, and that there are those who question whether CHIDIMMA herself has a rightful place among your people. CHIDIMMA took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that she needed to address the doubts head-on. It is true that my mother, Amina, came from another land, she began. But she chose to make Umidike her home, and she has served our people faithfully for many years. I was born in Umidike, and I have dedicated my life to protecting my village and my people. Whatever my origins, my loyalty lies with Umidike and with the cause of freedom. Obesai listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. Your words are strong, CHIDIMMA. But words alone will not be enough to convince all of our people. There are those who believe that your mother's past, and by extension your own, could be used against us by the king. CHIDIMMA's heart sank. She had known that the king would try to sow discord, but she hadn't realized just how deeply the doubts would run. She glanced at Nkem, who gave her a reassuring nod. We understand your concerns, Nkem said, his voice calm. But we ask you to judge CHIDIMMA by her actions, not by rumors. She has led our people with courage and wisdom, and she seeks to unite us against a common enemy. The king would like nothing more than to see us divided, to see us turn against one another. But if we stand together, we can defeat him. Obesai was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between CHIDIMMA and Nkem. Finally, he spoke. You speak wisely, Nkem. But trust is not easily given, especially in times of war. We will welcome you into our village as guests, and we will discuss your proposal with our council. But know that we will not make this decision lightly. CHIDIMMA nodded, grateful for the chance to prove herself. Thank you, Elder Obesai. We will respect your decision, whatever it may be. As they were led into the village, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The rumors had taken root, and she knew that it would take more than words to dispel them. She would need to prove her loyalty not just through speeches, but through her actions. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the guest house provided by the village, CHIDIMMA confided her fears to Nkem. What if the rumors spread to the other villages? What if they all start to doubt me? Nkem looked at her with concern. We can't let the king's lies get to us, CHIDIMMA. He's trying to divide us, to make us lose faith in each other. But we know the truth, and we need to hold on to that. CHIDIMMA nodded, but the doubts lingered. She knew that the strength of their alliance depended on trust, and if that trust was undermined, everything they had worked for could fall apart. The next day, they met with the village council of Aruku. The council members were wise and respected, and their decision would carry significant weight. CHIDIMMA and Nkem presented their case once again, speaking of the need for unity and the dangers of the king's growing power. But as they spoke, CHIDIMMA noticed something troubling. A few of the council members exchanged uneasy glances, as if they were already doubting her. She could feel the tension in the room, and she knew that the rumors had reached them. When they finished, the council leader, a dignified man named Ikin, addressed them. We appreciate your efforts to unite the villages, and we recognize the threat posed by the king. But there are concerns among our people about the rumors surrounding your origins, CHIDIMMA. These concerns cannot be ignored. CHIDIMMA felt a pound of frustration and fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. I understand your concerns, Counselor Ikin. But I ask you to judge me by my actions, not by the whispers of those who seek to divide us. I am committed to this cause, and I will do whatever it takes to protect our people. Ikin nodded, but the doubt in his eyes remained. We will need time to consider your proposal. Until then, you are welcome to stay in our village. As they left the council meeting, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that their mission was in jeopardy. The king's plan was working, he was planting seeds of doubt that could destroy the alliance from within. Nkem tried to reassure her. We'll find a way to prove ourselves, CHIDIMMA. We won't let the king win. But CHIDIMMA knew that the road ahead would be even more difficult than she had imagined. The battle wasn't just against the king's soldiers, it was against the fear and doubt that he was spreading. And if they couldn't find a way to overcome that, their entire cause could be lost. The days in Aruku stretched on as the village council deliberated, and CHIDIMMA felt the weight of their decision looming over her. She knew that time was not on their side, each day that passed was another day for the king to tighten his grip on the land. But she also knew that forcing the council's hand could backfire, further deepening their suspicions. In the meantime, CHIDIMMA and Nkem continued to engage with the villagers, hoping to build trust and dispel the doubts that had taken root. They participated in the daily activities of the village, helping with the harvest, sharing stories around the evening fires, and learning more about the customs and traditions of Aruku. Despite their efforts, the undercurrent of unease persisted. CHIDIMMA noticed that some of the villagers were friendly and welcoming, while others kept their distance, their gazes filled with suspicion. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and she could sense the tension growing. One evening, as CHIDIMMA sat by the river that flowed through the village, a young girl approached her. The girl, no older than 10, had a curious look in her eyes as she studied CHIDIMMA. Are you really from Umidike? The girl asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. CHIDIMMA smiled gently at the girl. Yes, I am. My name is CHIDIMMA. What's your name? I'm Ifeoma, the girl replied, still eyeing CHIDIMMA with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. But my mama says you might not be from here. She says you're different. CHIDIMMA's heart ached at the girl's words, but she kept her smile. I'm different in some ways, yes. My mother came from another land, but she chose to make Umidike her home. And I chose to fight for our people, to protect them from the king. Ifeoma seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding. Mama says you're brave. She says you're trying to help us. But some people are scared. CHIDIMMA reached out and gently took Ifeoma's hand. It's okay to be scared, Ifeoma. I get scared sometimes too. But we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. We have to stand together and be strong. The girl smiled back, her doubts momentarily eased. I think you're good, CHIDIMMA. I hope you can help us. CHIDIMMA watched as Ifeoma ran off to join her friends, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the girl's innocent faith was not shared by all. She knew that if she was to win over the council and the village, she would need to do more than just talk, she would need to prove herself in a way that left no room for doubt. The following morning, CHIDIMMA and Nkem were summoned to a meeting with the village council. The atmosphere in the council chamber was tense, and CHIDIMMA could see that the council members were divided. Some looked at her with open distrust, while others seemed more sympathetic. Ikin, the council leader, began the meeting with a somber tone. CHIDIMMA, Nkem, we have discussed your proposal at length. We recognize the threat posed by the king, and we understand the importance of unity. However, the concerns about your origins, CHIDIMMA, cannot be ignored. CHIDIMMA's heart pounded as she listened, knowing that this was a pivotal moment. She could see the conflict in Ikin's eyes, the desire to do what was right, tempered by the fear of making a mistake that could endanger his people. Before Ikin could continue, one of the council members, a stern woman named Chinyere, spoke up. We cannot align ourselves with someone whose loyalty is in question. The risks are too great. How do we know that CHIDIMMA is not working for the king, that she is not here to sow discord among us? Nkem opened his mouth to respond, but CHIDIMMA placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to wait. She knew that this was a battle to fight. I understand your concerns, Councillor Chinyere, CHIDIMMA said, her voice steady but firm. But I ask you to consider this: if I were working for the king, why would I risk my life and the lives of those I love to oppose him? Why would I seek to unite the villages against him? My actions have always been guided by my love for my people and my desire to see them free. Chinyere narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. Words are easy, CHIDIMMA. But words alone cannot prove your loyalty. CHIDIMMA knew that she needed to take a different approach. She couldn't just argue her way out of this, she needed to show them, in a way that would resonate with their culture and values. Councillor Chinyere, you are right, CHIDIMMA said, her voice calm. Words are not enough. That is why I am willing to undergo the rite of truth. A shocked silence fell over the council chamber. The rite of truth was an ancient ritual, rarely invoked, that required the subject to undergo a series of trials to prove their integrity and loyalty. The trials were demanding, both physically and spiritually, and failure could result in exile or even death. Ikin looked at CHIDIMMA with a mixture of respect and concern. Are you certain, CHIDIMMA? The rite of truth is not to be taken lightly. It is a dangerous path. I am certain, CHIDIMMA replied, her voice unwavering. I have nothing to hide, and I am willing to prove my loyalty in any way necessary. If this is what it takes to earn your trust and the trust of your people, then I will do it. The council members exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by CHIDIMMA's bold decision. Chinyere seemed to waver for a moment before nodding slowly. Very well. If you are willing to undergo the rite of truth, then we will accept your proposal. But know this, CHIDIMMA, once the rite begins, there is no turning back. I understand, CHIDIMMA said. And I accept the challenge. Ikin rose from his seat, his expression solemn. Then it is decided. The rite of truth will begin at dawn tomorrow. May the spirits guide you, CHIDIMMA. As CHIDIMMA and Nkem left the council chamber, Nkem couldn't contain his concern any longer. CHIDIMMA, are you sure about this? The rite of truth is dangerous. What if something goes wrong? CHIDIMMA met his gaze, her resolve clear. I have to do this, Nkem. The king has planted seeds of doubt, and I need to root them out. If I don't prove myself now, the alliance could fall apart. This is the only way. Nkem nodded, though his worry was evident. I'll be with you every step of the way, CHIDIMMA. We'll get through this together. That night, as CHIDIMMA prepared for the trials ahead, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and determination. The path she had chosen was fraught with danger, but she knew that she had to face it head-on. The future of the alliance, and the fate of the villages, depended on her success. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, CHIDIMMA stood ready to begin the rite of truth, knowing that whatever happened next would determine the course of their struggle against the king. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the village of Aruku, CHIDIMMA stood before the gathered council and villagers. The air was thick with anticipation, and the usual sounds of morning activity were replaced by a tense silence. The elders of the village, dressed in ceremonial robes, stood in a semicircle around CHIDIMMA, their faces solemn. They were the keepers of the rite of truth, and it was their duty to oversee the trials. Nkem stood at a distance, his eyes fixed on CHIDIMMA. Though he couldn't participate in the trials, he had vowed to support her in any way he could. CHIDIMMA met his gaze and gave him a reassuring nod. She knew that the trials would be challenging, but she was determined to face them with courage. Elder Ikin stepped forward, holding a staff adorned with ancient symbols. He raised the staff high, and the crowd fell silent. CHIDIMMA of Umidike, Ikin began, his voice resonating through the clearing. You have chosen to undergo the rite of truth, a sacred ritual that will test your spirit, your heart, and your loyalty. The trials you will face are not just physical, but also spiritual. They will reveal your true self, and in doing so, they will determine whether you are worthy of the trust of our people. CHIDIMMA nodded, her expression resolute. I am ready, Elder Ikin. Very well, Ikin said, lowering the staff. The first trial is the trial of the heart. You will be led into the sacred forest, where you must face your deepest fears. If your heart is true and your intentions pure, you will emerge victorious. A murmur ran through the crowd. The sacred forest was a place of mystery and legend, believed to be inhabited by spirits and creatures that tested the souls of those who entered. CHIDIMMA had heard stories of the forest since she was a child, and though she had never entered it herself, she knew that this trial would be a test of her inner strength. Two of the elders stepped forward and led CHIDIMMA to the edge of the forest. The trees loomed high above her, their branches twisted and gnawed, creating a canopy that blocked out much of the morning light. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and CHIDIMMA could feel the eyes of unseen beings watching her as she took her first steps into the shadows. The elders stopped at the entrance to the forest, allowing CHIDIMMA to continue on her own. She took a deep breath, stilling herself, and walked forward into the darkness. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air around her grew heavy, and the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of unknown creatures. As CHIDIMMA ventured deeper into the forest, the path became more difficult to navigate. Thorny vines reached out to snag her clothing, and the ground beneath her feet was uneven and treacherous. But she pressed on, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was only the beginning, the true trial lay ahead. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and CHIDIMMA found herself standing before a large, still pool of water. The surface of the water was so smooth that it reflected the sky above like a mirror. For a moment, CHIDIMMA felt a sense of peace, but that feeling was quickly replaced by a deep, gnawing fear. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged, a figure that made CHIDIMMA's blood run cold. It was her mother, Amina, but twisted and distorted, her eyes filled with anger and accusation. The sight of her mother in such a state was terrifying, and CHIDIMMA instinctively took a step back. Why have you come here, CHIDIMMA? The figure demanded, its voice a harsh whisper. You do not belong in this land. You are an outsider, a fraud. You have no place among these people. CHIDIMMA's heart ached at the words, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. The figure before her was not truly her mother, but it was a reflection of her deepest fears, the fear that she was not worthy, that she was a fraud who did not belong. No, CHIDIMMA whispered, shaking her head. I am not a fraud. I belong here. I am a daughter of Umidike, and I will fight for my people. The figure's eyes narrowed, and it stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. How can you fight for a people who do not trust you? How can you lead when you are filled with doubt? CHIDIMMA clenched her fist, summoning every ounce of strength within her. I will not let fear control me. I know who I am, and I know what I must do. My heart is true, and I will not falter. As she spoke these words, the figure began to waver, its form dissolving like mist. The fear that had gripped CHIDIMMA's heart began to recede, replaced by a calm certainty. She had faced her deepest fear and emerged stronger for it. The figure of her mother faded away completely, leaving CHIDIMMA alone in the clearing. The pool of water, once still and foreboding, now seemed serene and inviting. CHIDIMMA stepped forward and knelt by the water's edge, cupping her hands to take a drink. The water was cool and refreshing, and as she drank, she felt a sense of peace and clarity wash over her. The trial was over. She had faced the darkness within her own heart and had proven her resolve. When CHIDIMMA returned to the village, the elders were waiting for her. Ikin looked at her with approval, and even Chinya seemed impressed. The first trial had been passed, but there were more to come. The second trial, Ikin announced, is the trial of the mind. You must solve the riddle of the ancestors, a challenge that tests your wisdom and your understanding of our people's history. Only those who truly know and respect our ways can succeed. CHIDIMMA nodded, ready for whatever lay ahead. The right of truth was far from over, but with each trial, she grew more confident in her ability to overcome the challenges before her. As the villagers looked on, their expressions a mix of awe and hope, CHIDIMMA knew that she was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the trust and unity of all the villages. The path was difficult, but she was determined to see it through to the end.